Welcome everyone to our training, our webinar this afternoon. As you join, if you'd like to introduce yourselves in the chat, we're going to give folks just another minute or so to arrive. If you could introduce yourself with your name and role and the SU and SD and school that you represent, that would be great. All right, I think we can get started. Welcome to our sixth workshop in the Read Vermont series. This is Adolescent Reading Struggles, Why They Happen and How to Help. As a former high school teacher, this particular subject is very near and dear to my heart, so I very much look forward to today's presentation. I'm Emily Loita. I'm the English Language Arts and Literacy Specialist at the Agency of Education. I know that my colleague Emily Lesh is also on today's call. She's the project manager and lead for the Read Vermont project. There may be other folks from our team as well. Read Vermont is a real team initiative across the Agency of Education. And so if there are other folks here from the AOE, we welcome you here as well. Read Vermont is a major priority at the AOE. It's our comprehensive statewide initiative dedicated to improving literacy outcomes for Vermont students. Our vision is that every child can read by third grade and that striving adolescent readers are supported. This will ensure all students are ready for college or career and can experience the joy and utility of reading. I am pleased to introduce tonight's presenter, Monica Krumbach. Monica is a structured literacy coach at the Stern Center for Language and Learning. She has over a decade of experience working with students, families, and educators as an Orton Gillingham tutor, mentor, trainer, coach, presenter, and curriculum and instruction manager. She received her initial level training at the Children's Dyslexia Center of West Michigan and has since gained extensive experience working with students diagnosed with dyslexia, as well as those living in poverty. Adolescent literacy and learners are one of her areas of interest and expertise. And now I will turn it over to Monica.
Thank you, Emily, for that lovely introduction. As Emily just said, my name is Monica Krumbach. And to add some context to that description, everything that she said happened between my daughter's first grade year and her college graduation, which happened just this past spring. So it has been a journey. I'm really thrilled to have landed here with you all this afternoon. Fair warning, you will be doing some reading during today's presentation, both off of the screen and on the screen. So occasionally on a slide, I'll ask you to just go ahead and read it yourself. It seems only fair. I will also be doing some reading, just fair warning, because I want to be able to make sure I'm giving you accurate percentages. I'm accurately quoting folks. So I'm not ignoring you, but a girl can only remember so much. So as Emily said, we are here to talk about adolescent literacy, specifically adolescent reading struggles. We're going to talk about why they happen and how to help. It is a broad topic and probably not something that we're going to cover it completely today, but I hope this is the beginning of what will be a longer conversation. Before I get started, I'm hearing something in the background, so please check and see if you are on mute, and then we will go ahead and get started. I know it's easy to forget that. Or to turn it on and forget to turn it, or to turn it off and forget to turn it back on. All right, that said, we are going to get started. So our objectives today are to get a clear picture of our current reality, which we'll dig into in just a couple minutes, explore some causes of adolescent reading struggles and some evidence-based instructional choices and strategies to address them. And finally, we're going to consider some of the long-term impacts of adolescent reading struggles. Using the chat today, we're going to do this just a little bit differently than we have been if you've been to previous workshops. I am going to solicit your input today, and I love to hear from you, and I love for you to hear from each other. When that happens, please direct your comments to everyone in the chat. If you have questions or comments while the presentation is ongoing, so I'm mid-slide, go ahead and direct those to Lee Bittler in the chat, and I'm going to have her say hi, so everybody can see Lee and Lee's name.
Hi.
She will answer and share those out as appropriate, because often it turns out we have the same questions. We're thinking the same things. That's wonderful. And having that just sort of consolidated and shared out in that manner just makes it more time efficient. So again, we welcome your thoughts. We're just going to do a little consolidating and a little bit of answering on the side today to keep us moving. We're about to ask you about your knowledge of adolescent literacy. We've asked every other workshop, hey, what do you know about this right now? And we've gotten quite a range of experience. I don't expect anything different today, but I think it's important before I ask you about your experiences to really define who we're talking about today. So adolescent readers, that means every student in grades 4 through 12. So it doesn't matter if they're sitting in a science classroom, or they're sitting at home, or they're sitting in the school gym, or if they're in their ELA classroom. Those are all adolescent readers. So with that in mind, we are going to go ahead and ask you about your knowledge base when it comes to this group of readers. Lee is going to launch a poll. There we go. So go ahead and answer. Well, it looks like it's going a little slow. There we go. Folks are jumping on now. Take some thought sometimes to think, where do I fit in this range? It's a big range of students. It's like we're at 100%, maybe?
We're about, looks like we're about 60%.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. For some reason on my side, it says 34, 34, 100% answered. So that's where I got that from.
Oh, yeah. I know what you mean.
Now I see what we're looking at. 72%. Thank you for that 72%. We'll get just a little more time for folks to answer. I recognize some familiar names as folks were signing in, so it's good to see those of you that I've seen before and maybe worked with in a different capacity. It's always good to see those faces and names again. At about 76%. Does anybody else want to jump in and let us know where they are on this scale? Over 80 now? Whenever you're ready, Lee.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you for that. And again, it looks like we have a decent range of experiences in understanding the causes of adolescent reading failure. So again, thank you to those of you who filled that out. Moving along from our definition slide, here is our first step, right? I promised we would be getting a clear picture of our current reality. We're going to look at some research and we're going to reflect a little bit on our own situations and our own experiences. This slide shows a quote from Jim Knight. If you are a literacy coach, you probably are aware of Jim Knight's work. If you are a teacher, I still encourage you to look him up. He has some wonderful resources. And he's saying here that to be the educators we want, we have to get a clear picture of our current reality. And really, this is just Jim Knight saying, wherever we're going, we have got to start from right here. So let's talk about here for a minute. Right now, where we stand in this moment, are we ready to meet the needs of striving adolescent readers? And there is some recent research on this from RAND. This comes from just last year, from 2024. And really what they did is they reached out first and talked to teachers. They surveyed teachers to see how it was going, what teachers felt they already knew, what they already had in their toolkit, versus what teachers said they still needed, what they felt was lacking. So we're going to hear the teacher voice first today. And teachers of adolescent students said they would benefit from additional training on how to help students who are experiencing difficulties with word reading, vocabulary, and reading comprehension. And this was roughly 70% of the teachers included in the survey. They said they needed this type of training. RAND also put out a series of questions and asked teachers to answer these questions to the best of their ability. And their answers showed that many teachers of adolescent readers need more information on how students develop word reading skills. 40% of the teachers held misconceptions about how these skills develop, and nearly half of the teachers reported that their primary source of knowledge about reading instruction did not come from a teacher prep program or professional development, but their own personal experiences in the classroom. And these misconceptions included the idea that students will learn to read on their own if we just give them enough time, and that phonics knowledge is not essential to reading comprehension. So again, teachers know they need this additional training, and these answers show that they need this additional training. Finally, teachers said that they needed more resources to help them identify and support students who are having difficulty reading instructional materials. They identified both digital and paper resources, and they asked for additional trained staff to provide targeted intensive intervention where needed. So this is what teachers had to say when they were asked. These were teachers in grades 3 through 8. Having worked with a number of high school teachers, I can assure you that their answers generally run along these same lines. So something that I often hear asked and talked about is maybe we just stem the tide, right? Maybe instead of talking directly about addressing adolescent reading struggles, we stem that tide by doing what works in K-3. And so we actually have a case study for this, and it's Mississippi. You've probably heard of the Mississippi Miracle. And you can see the first paragraph on this slide tells us that doing what works in K-3, shifting to explicit phonics instruction, doing it with fidelity, has worked. The fourth graders in Mississippi have been able to close the gap and are now at the national average on the NAEP assessment, which is great news. But that same national test measures reading again in the 8th grade. And that gap, while it is closing, has not closed at the same rate as the gap the fourth graders have succeeded in closing. So before I move to the next slide, I'm wondering if anybody has any thought or guess as to why this miracle. Keep in mind, these 8th graders did benefit from this improved instruction. They've been doing it for a while in Mississippi. Any idea why the Mississippi Miracle did not make it to the 8th grade? If you have a thought about that, go ahead and put it into the chat. And I'll give you just a minute to think. Any ideas on why the fourth graders were able to close the gap, but not the eighth graders? Okay, so we can take a look as to why that happened. I think this is really illustrative just to look at the work. So when we think about reading, it's a lot easier to read The Cat Sat on the Mat, right? Than The Party Turned into a Tremendous Catastrophe. That's harder to read. So let's compare these two passages. I'm going to have you do this on your own. I'm going to ask you to read the fourth grade passage and the eighth grade passage. These are both pulled from ReadWorks. It's a great resource for reading passages if you're looking for them. And while you are reading the two passages, I want you to write down the differences that you note between the two. And then we will come together and we will discuss what's different between the fourth grade passage and the eighth grade passage that may help us explain that disparity in Mississippi's results. So go ahead, take a minute, read both, and jot down some notes about the differences that you see between the passages. See some great comments in the chat talking about vocabulary, background knowledge, subject matter, all good things to notice. Kids can relate to bats. That's good. Yep, that's another kind of background knowledge thing. More multisyllabic words. Really nice. Okay, so now we're going to come back together and discuss these points in a little more depth. So thank you for all of that thinking. I love to see that. So all of this is right, of course. Everybody's right. So that's a wonderful thing to get to say during a presentation. The first thing I want to know is just simply the increased decoding challenges between these two passages. So if we look at the fourth grade passage, only 3 words actually exceed 2 syllables. And in the eighth grade passage, 12 words exceed 2 syllables, including words with less typical sound symbol correspondence, like chemical, ethylene, and atmosphere. And research tells us that longer words are difficult to read simply for being longer. They're challenging to working memory. They also have to deal with syllable boundaries. And hey, what does that vowel actually say? Where does the stress land in that word? I've never seen that spelling for that sound before, so I don't know what it says. And finally, morphological complexity. There might be multiple suffixes, prefixes, and roots in that one word. So they are tougher to decode for being longer. The second difference is that vocabulary piece. Tier 2 and Tier 3 words crop up more in that eighth grade passage. We have occurring, hydrogen, carbon, atoms, molecule, atmosphere, maturation, reproduction, and decay. There are fewer such words in that fourth grade passage, and 2 of them are at least partially defined. So let's look at that fourth grade passage. You can see decreasing is immediately defined for the student, meaning there are fewer of them. When we look at disease, it's not immediately and fully defined, but it is something that has killed more than 1 million bats. So we get some context clue there. And then we get hibernating. It's sort of the same deal. They don't necessarily tell you what hibernating is, but they tell you when it happens. And kids are often familiar with the idea of hibernation from bears. So again, much more definition going on there. Fewer words, more fully defined. Finally, we're getting a little more information for each sentence in that eighth grade passage. And if we look at that last sentence, plant hormones are chemicals produced by plants that control their growth, reproduction, maturation, and decay, not only is there the weight of that vocabulary, but that's a lot of information packed into the same sentence. And a number of the students that I have had will have forgotten what is having this impact by the time they get to the end of that sentence. So the message is that just like science and math, reading gets harder as we move through the grade levels, and continuing instruction is required. Reading cat is not the same as reading catastrophe. So we should not assume that a good reader in the 4th grade will automatically be a good reader in the 8th grade. It is on us to move them up to those more advanced levels of literacy. So thank you, everybody, for reading and noting those differences. So we looked at what teachers had to say, which is always important. And now we're going to look a little bit more broadly. Some of us have some work to do. If we're administrators, if we're folks who support teachers, there are things that we need to be doing as well. So this is from a little bit more research from a couple of places. The first thing teachers need is high quality professional development, and they asked for it, right? And they specifically asked for, when they responded to that survey, training that responded to the needs of their students, including foundational reading skills, regardless of grade level. The second thing is they want instructional coaching and regular opportunities to collaborate with colleagues. They don't just want it, they need it. Instructional coaching makes it more likely that teachers will adopt evidence-based practices and implement them consistently and with fidelity. When something is new and it feels a little wobbly and difficult, sometimes it's really hard to dig in and stick with it. If we have a coach by our side, that's a little easier. And when we can collaborate with our colleagues, those evidence-based practices are more likely to spread. We're more likely to see alignment, both vertical and horizontal. When our teachers aren't talking to each other, aren't learning from each other, aren't collaborating, we get isolated pockets of evidence-based instruction. We want them all supporting each other so that we get evidence-based in every classroom. The third thing they need is a good system in place to manage behavior effectively. When we have chaos in the classroom, it's hard to make learning happen. And I know I've heard, and many of you may have heard, and may be experiencing an increase in difficult and some severe behaviors in the classroom. This is at the same time when we may be experiencing reduced staffing levels in our classrooms and schools. This is something of a perfect storm because, again, one student can take over a classroom if the behavior is loud enough, severe enough. So reading instruction is reliant on having that calm classroom that is conducive to teaching and learning. Finally, teachers need adequate time, space, and instructional resources to address the needs of older striving readers. This does not mean 20 minutes a day, 3 days a week, in a corner, in a hallway, at a table when we can get it. This means dedicated classroom space. This means hours a week. We cannot expect to catch a kid up who is years behind, minutes at a time, catch as catch can, tucked into a corner of the library. When that time is not dedicated, it's also not often respected. So kids are often pulled from that intervention to do something else. So again, dedicated real time, space, and resources to work with these kids at a level that will allow them to become good readers. So I want to ask you, in your situation, in your school, I'm going to have Lee launch another poll, and I want you to tell me which one of these do you think is most needed, most imperative in your situation, in your school or learning environment. Thank you for answering this. This is actually really interesting to see that so many folks need that adequate time, space, and those instructional resources that are both appropriate to the student's age and their needs as readers. Feel free to answer if you haven't yet. I know there are a few people who haven't answered, but it looks like number 4, that adequate time and space piece, and number 1, well, number 1's about tied with number 2 now in terms of high quality professional development and instructional coaching and opportunities to collaborate with colleagues. So again, thank you so much for answering that. That's actually really illuminating as to what's going on in your communities. All right, so we are going to move on. And we are actually going to take a breath here. So what I would like you to do is take a moment, get up, stretch if you need to, that's fine. And then jot down something that you've taken away so far, something that stuck with you, something that made you think, and feel free to share it in the chat if you would like. It's not essential, but it's always good to hear what folks are thinking about. Hi, Julie. Hi, Karen. It's good to see you both in the chat. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Does anybody want to share a takeaway from our talk so far? I know we haven't been together too long yet. All right. Well, I hope everybody stretched, took a drink. Oops, something is in my chat here. First instruction. Yeah, that is really interesting. But we still need to be intentional about teaching students to read. Yeah. Yeah, and again, K3 doing what works, it absolutely matters. It absolutely does. It's just that reading instruction shouldn't stop at 3rd grade. Yeah, we need time with these kids. First instruction, syllabication, yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody, for putting your thoughts in here. Yeah, face additional complexities. Absolutely. Much harder to do reading. Let's say we're a 9th grader. That doesn't look anything like what we read in the 3rd grade. The two things are quite dissimilar. It's interesting that we think of math that way pretty organically. Of course, adding is probably not as hard as trigonometry, but we don't think of reading that way. Again, a single syllable, closed syllable word, it has some relation to what we see in 10th grade, but it's not going to carry us through 10th grade. So thank you for sharing those thoughts. We are now going to move into causes of adolescent reading struggles, and we're going to start with word recognition. This probably doesn't get its just due when it comes to older students because we tend to look past it, which we'll discuss in just a moment, but it's a really important piece to look at when we consider how our students are reading and why they are reading that way. So on your screen, you see the simple view of reading. Many of you are probably very familiar with Goff and Tumner's work. And this view, this model tells us that by multiplying a student's word recognition, which is their ability to recognize words in text, by their language comprehension, which is their ability to understand oral language, we get their reading comprehension. And the language comprehension piece expands through reading, but again, its root is in oral language. Any deficit in either that word recognition piece, that language comprehension piece, or in both of those pieces is going to cause a deficit in reading comprehension. So in other words, I can't decode my way out of a lack of language comprehension, and my language comprehension is not going to make up entirely for a word recognition deficit. I need both of those boxes to be skills. I need both of those boxes to be strong. So again, we are going to begin with word recognition. If we look at Scarborough's rope, which I always think of is just the simple view tipped over and shaken out, right? If we took those boxes and shook them out, these would be the contents. So if we look at word recognition, the components are phonological awareness, decoding, and sight recognition, meaning any word that our student recognizes on sight. So again, they're talking about the same thing. Scarborough's rope simply gives us a little bit more detail. So something that we should all note, and I think most of us really know, is that reading struggles start early. Many, if not most, striving adolescent readers started out struggling. So this is a quote from Joe Torgeson. He's a favorite of mine, well respected in the field. And you can read his quote here talking about how fourth graders were struggling, usually from kindergarten or first grade. They struggle with their phonological skills. They struggle to match sounds to print. Their skills are weak, leaving these grades. And if they go unaddressed, then they carry these reading needs from one grade level to the next and to the next. And he says here, their problems then spiral. We also have students, it's worth noting, who can trick us. We have students who accommodate like nobody's business, who come in reading like experts in some instances. It seems like they're going to do this great forever. And it's only when they start really struggling to compensate, when they become overwhelmed by the text itself, that we kind of catch them. I had a student not too long ago who started out in like the 70th percentile on Dibble scores. Everybody thought, oh, this is wonderful. And over time, he slid to the fourth. By the time I met him in the eighth grade, he was very near the very bottom of the red on Dibbles. So we have a couple of different profiles, but most commonly, we can catch these kids early. And if we do and we address their needs, then they won't end up in fourth, sixth, eighth grade still struggling. So Torgeson said their problems spiral. What exactly does that mean? So when students find reading difficult, they're not going to do it very often. And when they do, they're going to do it grudgingly. So as a result of reading less, they gain fewer skills, fewer vocabulary words, fewer concepts, fewer enduring ideas than do their peers. And each year that this goes on, the gulf between what students know and what they're expected to know grows wider. Meaning that this is not just a reading crisis, it is actually a knowledge crisis. Poor word reading skills, even when they do read, prevent them from achieving the accuracy and the fluency required for comprehension. So reading is both arduous and pointless. And most of us are not inclined to engage in activities that are both difficult and pointless. So reading struggles begin to feel like showing up at the bottom of the same steep hill day after day, unable to make it even halfway up that hill, while our peers are tearing past us and running up that hill over and over and over again. This happens all day to these kids in every classroom. It happens all week and all through the school year. So again, when they do read, they can't understand it. Meanwhile, their friends are doing it with ease. This is when students start to become increasingly discouraged and ashamed, not just year upon year, but month upon month. Every day of this is disheartening for these kids. So they start to act out. They start to tell us in one way or another that this is trauma for them. And we start to see avoidance behaviors. We start to see disruptive behaviors. We start to see kids asking for bathroom passes 4 times while reading is going on, asking to go to the nurse, asking to call home, and then finally just skipping school altogether. They are embarrassed, ashamed, and again, they have counted themselves out of learning entirely. They will go without whatever they're supposed to carry into that next grade level. So to kind of understand that frustration and that feeling that these kids are carrying with them, I would like you to read the passage on this slide exactly as it's written. Our brains try to fix things for us. Don't let your brain fix this. Don't try to guess what it should really be. Read this exactly as written. I'm going to give you about a minute to do that, and then we're going to come back together. I'm going to ask you some questions. So go ahead and read this passage. if you are through the passage, I'd like you to answer a question for me. And that is, what kind of shop did Mrs. Mooney open? What kind of shop did she have? Can anyone tell me? Again, use the words on the slide. What kind of shop did she open? What does it say on the slide, Riley? Bachelor's. Yeah, a bachelor's shop, right? She opened a bachelor's shop. And yeah, that is a great example, by the way, of a brain trying to fix that for us. It probably doesn't mean bachelor's, it probably means this. However, those kids aren't thinking that way. Tell me one thing that happened to Mr. Mooney in this story. What happened to him? Just one thing. He had a lot going on, I'll tell you that much. Yeah, someone died, question mark. I love that. Ran into the bed, he drank, started drinking, died maybe. Y'all have it out for Mr. Mooney. I don't blame you if he's not set up as a sympathetic character. Fighting with his wife, plundered the tile. That is my favorite part of this. Thank you for choosing that. He buried meat, question mark. Love that, Julie. All right, so this passage is read by a student, and this is what they get. Now, you can probably predict which of these words they've likely gotten wrong. Some of you already have, saying, oh, that's probably butcher. So let's look at the errors. So these are all of the errors. This is a 100-word passage, 83% accuracy. Does anyone see a pattern to the errors this student made? Is there a pattern here that you can see? What kind of bell would go off for you and you'd think we need to work on XYZ? Multisyllabic, word endings, suffixes. Very nice. Anyone else? Mostly 2 syllables. Yep. Very nice. Vowel teams. Attention to print. Yep. Multisyllabic. Yeah, again, I mean, the thing that we noted when we were looking at that 4th grade passage versus that 8th grade passage was that words get longer and harder. All right, very nice. Thank you for those answers. We need to reveal what was really going on with the Moonies, who were having a really unlucky life by all accounts. One thing before I switch is plundered the tile, I think illustrates, again, problems in both of the boxes in the simple view, right? Decoding struggles and language comprehension struggles really coming to bear on this student's reading. Nobody plungers the tile. I'm not even sure what that means, but the real wording was probably equally as confusing for that student, and I'll show you why. This is the real passage. It's from James Joyce. So those of you who are Joyce fans may have read it before. You can go ahead and look through it. Okay, so it was a butchered shop. So congrats to those folks who are like, that's probably butcher. Or if you're a Joyce fan, again, good for you, bringing that background knowledge. She married her father's foreman. He went to the devil, which is, again, probably not something the kid has heard, hopefully not. He plundered the till. So again, even if if he was successful, he couldn't probably make any sense of plundered the till, had nothing to go on here, couldn't decode it. It's kind of a mess for him. So both of those things came to bear, I think, in that moment. He fought with his wife in the presence of customers and not the pressure of costumes. And by buying bad meat, he ruined his business. But yes, multisyllabic words are difficult. Attention to text comes into play. We were kind of changing out the small words often to make them work with the changes that we made due to our poor decoding. But if this is what reading is like, day in, day out, it's arduous, it's pointless, and I get absolutely nothing out of it, is it really worth my effort? A lot of kids are going to say no. And then imagine if they were asking for oral responses and you're like, it was a bachelor's shop. Again, embarrassing, demoralizing. So this is why we see the behaviors that we see. So why don't we catch this, right? If it's happening a lot, and it truly is, why don't we catch it? And the truth is we don't, because we're honestly not often looking for it in the upper grades. Go ahead and read the teacher's statement on this slide here. It honestly does make sense that a student with serious decoding problems is going to have serious comprehension problems. So I'm sure the comprehension scores were not good for this student. The problem is in stopping right there. That is something that a teacher of an adolescent reader may be tuned into. Aha, I know some comprehension strategies. I can work on vocabulary with this student in my classroom. But if the student can't read, those comprehension strategies are not going to be successful because we are not intervening at the right level. This is probably not something, again, that this teacher ever thought she would have to address directly. This article goes on to explain that she gets OG training and starts tutoring some of her students. But again, that's her going many additional miles in training and in work herself. Her teacher prep program did not prepare her for this, so she missed it. This happens a lot. In fact, I think a week ago, I had a high school teacher in one of my workshops who said she was kicking herself because she never ever thought about her kids' decoding abilities, but she wasn't trained to. Now her radar is up for this, and she's thinking more about, can this student read? It's a lovely quote from Miss Anita Archer. They're all quotable. This one fits our purposes really well. There is no comprehension strategy powerful enough to compensate for the fact that you can't read the words. So trying to address a decoding deficiency by teaching comprehension strategies will not work. It doesn't matter how good we are. It doesn't matter how good the strategies happen to be. Students cannot read if they cannot read the words. It's as simple as that. So we go deeper, right? If we see a student struggling with comprehension, whether that's on a benchmark assessment, whether it's something we're observing day after day in our classroom, we need to think, what is causing this? It is not unheard of that a student maybe does need a comprehension-based intervention. Maybe it's vocabulary, maybe it's background knowledge, maybe it's, syntax. Maybe we need to get in there and work on some syntax with that student. Maybe that student doesn't have strategies. Maybe there are memory issues there. Comprehension can be the problem, but we need to make sure it's the problem. So we need to look at that student's fluency. Do they have the fluency to support comprehension, or are they thinking that Mrs. Mooney opened a bachelor's shop, right? We need to know if that student is an accurate reader, reading at the pace of speech, a pace that allows them to understand the text. So we look at their fluency. If they're fluent, then yeah, we might have a comprehension issue. Odds are they aren't fluent. Again, that can also be down to not knowing what I'm reading in terms of understanding. That can slow me down. That can have me mispronouncing some words that I've never heard before. But it also may be, again, that I simply can't read the words. At that point, it's a phonics issue. And I need to assess my student at that level and have those holes addressed for that student in order for them to become better, more proficient readers. So again, we dig until we hit the root of the problem. which unfortunately very often is phonics. Okay, we are now going to move into first some individual reading and then some breakout room time. So you're going to spend 10 minutes first doing some reading. Lee is going to ask you where you fit in terms of grade level so that we sort you into breakout rooms correctly. Those of you who are going to be in grades 9 through 12 will stay with me after you do 10 minutes of reading. Everybody else will be sorted into rooms. There will be a facilitator in each room. Our goal with this reading and discussion is to explore our role in supporting word reading skills in older readers. So that is our focus. While you are reading, please take some notes. Write down some questions, some things that stick out for you, so you're prepped for that conversation in the breakout room. So Lee's going to go ahead and launch the poll, or should we do the document first, Lee? What do you think?
Maybe I can put the document in the chat, and then when we near the end of our reading time, I can launch the poll. How does that sound?
That sounds great to me.
All right. So the document's in the chat, and you'll see the different links that you can click on for your applicable grade level or role.
So you will have 10 minutes of just quiet individual reading time. Feel free to turn off your camera, get comfortable, and do some reading and jotting down of thoughts. All right. Welcome back, everybody. I hope I didn't take you by massive surprise there. The clock kind of shocked me because we were having a really good conversation. So I am going to shift back to our slide deck. Say a little prayer for me. This is often very clunky for me. You're all thinking she's a teenager, but no, I'm 52. And my skills are the skills of a 52-year-old when it comes to tech. Look at that. Okay. God is with me today, y'all. Okay, so thank you for your participation in those breakout rooms. Much appreciated, very thoughtful. Anybody, any of the facilitators from the other room want to share anything out quickly before I move on?
I can share out quickly from our 6th through 8th grade. Had a
Please.
conversation, probably could have talked for another 20 minutes, of course, but
Of course.
appreciate everyone jumping in. And I think a lot of people identified that, you know, we have these readers in middle school who they need some of those foundational skills, and sometimes it's too easy to want to brush over them because we have technology and things like spell check, but understanding how spelling instruction, phonics instruction, decoding instruction can still be incredibly powerful and really can support our students to actually become more fluent readers. And that was definitely a prevailing view and what folks expressed in our room.
Lovely, thank you for sharing that. Anybody else want to share before
I can share from Monica. This is Amy from 3 through 5.
Hi,
And we were talking about just how, you know, really teaching kids one part, let's say a Latin root, really unlocks the door for being able to read, you know, many other words, and how, you know, that can be really empowering for kids. But we also talked about making sure that some of those kind of more basic skills, right? Syllable types. That was what our article was about, syllable types and syllable division, and being very explicit with your instruction that syllable division helps us break the words apart, and then we can identify syllable types and how important that is, because that's really the unlocking or the decoding, right? That's kind of cracking the code for our kids. So it was a great discussion.
love that. Anybody else want to speak for their group before we?
I can also briefly share a couple of the themes that came up in the pre-K through 2nd grade room. Even though we had an administrator in there, we had somebody who's working with middle school age students. But I think a main takeaway from the Jan Hasbrook article was fluency is not the same as speed. There's many other things to consider. You know, the reading rate is a reflection of decoding skills, but it also reflects comprehension to some extent. But yes, that was a big theme. Fluency is not the same as speed.
Thank you for that. Yeah, so important, and so often confused. And then kids really internalize that and they start tearing through text, just absolutely tearing through it and not understanding it. So a good sort of word of warning and some support there in that piece to just get them reading accurately before you try anything else. Make sure they are good word readers. So I think the only other group that we have yet to hear from was maybe the admin group. Lee, did you want to share anything from your group?
Yes, sure. We talked about a few wide-ranging topics, but really thinking about how the topics of the article or the content of the excerpt that we read was still applicable today, even though it had been a few years since it had been published, and the ways in which we can help build that understanding, not only with teachers, but administrators, so that they can really support those practices and the necessary time for collaboration so that teachers can really work together across content areas to come together and help help deepen their understanding and their practices around those critical reading strategies for all learners.
Nice. Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, some of these pieces I pull out and share, they are a little older. I think they have aged well. And like you said, Lee, not much has changed in some ways. That's not always a great thing. We can still look at something from 10 years ago and see ourselves in it. So we also need to consider, how do we apply ourselves? How do we make changes if we can still see ourselves in something that's a little older? So I appreciate that insight as well. So we are going to move on from here. This is a lovely slide of people who are actually in the same room. We're doing the Zoom version, I think, pretty well. So we are now going to move from those word reading pieces, which are incredibly important, essential, and foundational. And we're going to look at some considerations beyond the classroom. This is something I think that can be a little uncomfortable, that can feel a little bit like we're making excuses. We are not. This is a nod to reality, right? Kids learn in the classroom, they learn at home, they learn in their communities, and everything they carry with them is applied to their learning or works against their learning. So we're going to explore, again, some of these pieces beyond the classroom. So what else might be happening, right? We talked about kiddos who just really can't read the words. So that's the long and short of it. They need help decoding. We're going to get to language comprehension. But here is RAND again. This is an older study, again, something that I still see value in, so I often refer to it. This is the RAND study of adolescent reading comprehension. And this is a reminder from them that although we think of reading instruction happening within the context of the classroom, that context actually extends far beyond the classroom, far beyond the school even. It has to do with our family, with our community, with resources we either do or do not have. Let's get to talking about that. But first, I have a question for you. And that question is, what is something outside of the classroom that you see impacting your students' reading? Go ahead and throw it in the chat if you can think of something outside of the classroom. Home life, stress and trauma, ACEs, lack of parent involvement, screen time, anxiety, phones. Yeah, phones. Attention, cell phones. Yep, these are all issues. It's so interesting to see how many digital issues come up now compared to if I had asked this question 30 years ago. No play. That's an excellent point, Carol. Thank you for bringing that up. Often when we release kids out into the wild now, they pick up their phone if they can. Conversation's really important. Genetics, yeah, some reading difficulties are genetic. All right, thank you for those thoughts. Everybody was right on it, and I deeply appreciate that. I can just ask Siri. Yeah, that's a fact too. All right, so you guys have mentioned many of the things that are also on my list. So the first one is poverty and its inherent challenges. We know by looking at the NAEP that gaps in the scores persist, achievement gaps persist between Black, Latino, and low income students. They continue to score lower than their white and higher income peers. This highlights ongoing disparities in education and access to some of the resources that you need to become a reader. These kids are also exposed to more toxins, more pollutants like lead, for example, more severe asthma incidents in these communities, which is linked to absenteeism, hunger, which can cause problems with our focus and our mood and our concentration in the classroom, homelessness, which makes it difficult to get to school and focus while we are at school. We do know that children experiencing homelessness are less likely to graduate from high school. Trauma, which is something that a lot of people mentioned, this can be trauma that is either ongoing or trauma that occurred earlier in childhood. So I do bring it up in adolescent groups because I think it's important to realize that something that may have happened 6, 7 years ago may still be impacting that student. It has a neurological impact. The NIH reports that most types of ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, were significantly associated with poor sleep quality, emotional and behavior problems, and lower academic achievement. Again, some students suffer such severe and ongoing trauma that they are locked in the fight or flight mode. That is a very difficult mode to learn in. Chronic absenteeism, we talked about this a little bit with homelessness, but we have kids missing school now for all kinds of reasons and seemingly no reason. Because it seems to have become an optional task in many ways for some families, we don't see kids coming regularly, and we cannot teach a student who is not there. So that is a real issue. Many of you mentioned the literacy environment at home and at school. Keep in mind, we have schools around the country that are poorly resourced and poorly staffed, if they are staffed at all. We have communities without walkable libraries, without used or new bookstores, where children do not have the ability to simply pick up a book. And there is a correlation between that access to books, how many books are in the home, and becoming a reader. And finally, high mobility. Children who move around a lot for any reason tend to have lower levels of academic achievement. Most of the time, these children move laterally, so they're not necessarily moving from a school that was struggling to a school that is showing some more success. They are moving laterally. That is traumatic for them. Sometimes their files don't follow them, and we don't know a lot about them when they reach our classroom. So again, all of these are factors that can impact reading. We're going to tie it all together, both inside and outside factors, right? The RAND study does a really good job of this, and that's why it's sort of a classic. It's something that we continue to come back to. It's also one of those rare and beautiful moments where adolescent reading comprehension took center stage. It was the point of this research. So the RAND study tells us that comprehension depends on the interaction of text, activity, and reader, and all of that happens within the sociocultural context. So let's unpack that a little bit. The reader. So the reader comes into reading carrying their life with them, their background knowledge, their motivation, their interest in the content, and their cognitive capabilities. What is their attention span? Can they attend to the text? What is their memory like? Do they have some memory challenges? Can they analyze? Can they infer? Can they visualize? All of these are coming with the reader, and you have a lot of readers in your classroom, and no one is exactly like the other. So we see a lot of variance in our readers in our classrooms. The next, we have the text. And so one text is not like another. Like I just said, kids are all different one from the other. The texts may be wildly different as well in terms of their complexity, in terms of their features that either let kids in pretty easily or make it more difficult to understand the text. Is it primarily surface level information where if a kid can decode, they're probably going to do okay. They're looking for dates and names. They're getting some basic info. Or does that student have to read closely? Do they have to understand figurative language? How tough is the decoding? Is it more like that 8th grade passage than that 4th grade passage? So these pieces are interacting with everything about the reader. And we're not done just yet because we have the activity. So we have a certain text and a certain reader. Now, what are we asking that reader to do with that text? Are we asking them simply to make a timeline, just go through and find the dates? Or are we asking them to write in response? Are we asking them to think deeply? Are we asking them when was Abraham Lincoln born? Or are we asking them what were the causes and results of the Civil War? These are different reasons for reading, and one of them is more difficult than the other. So again, these interactions shift and change based on what we're asking a certain student to read and why we are asking them to read it. And finally, we have the context. And this has to do with, again, the greater life that that student reads. What is that family's, that community's relationship to literacy? How well resourced is that community to promote and support literacy? What are the feelings toward literacy? These are all in the mix when we think about the context in which students read. This little heuristic is very, very handy. I sort of keep it front of mind. It is in most of my presentations just to get people thinking. One text is not going to be exactly like the last. Teachers will often ask, well, my kid was fluent, and now with this book, it's like they've never read before. So again, reconsider the elements and the interactions here. Is something more difficult with that text? Does the student have less background knowledge about that topic? Reconsider this with different texts as you move through the school year. Now I'm going to have you step away for just a couple minutes, maybe 5 minutes. Lee is going to put a link to the RAND study in the chat. I am going to have you go and maybe pick just one of those elements, the reader, the text, the activity, or the context, and read the little blurb about it there on that page. I encourage you to download the PDF so that you can look at it more in depth later. And we will come back in about 5 minutes. We have about 1 more minute. So make sure again that you have downloaded the PDF if this is new to you, or even if it's something that you haven't looked at in a while. That way you'll be able to take a better look at it and just sort of have it handy. Again, I saw Emily mention in the chat, yeah, this is one of those reasons that disciplinary literacy is so important, and that we understand that whether we think of ourselves as reading teachers or not, we are teachers of language, and we do teach often through text. So let's consider the specific challenges of our text and what we need to lift our students up to be able to read it. All right, so I'm going to assume we're back. There we go. I see some smiling faces. That's good to see. Okay, so we are going to keep going. Thanks to Rand for that. All right, so when we talk about research, I think sometimes it can feel really disconnected and really unrelatable, right? Okay, well, that's what that research says, but I don't really understand how that applies to me and my class. So a reference that always comes to mind when I think of Rand is the baseball study, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, or it can be called the baseball experiment. If this is new to you, or even if you have that background knowledge and you've seen this before, I'm going to give you a moment to just read the description of this experiment or study that is on the slide. So go ahead and read this description. So what the baseball study tells us is that background knowledge can help level the playing field. These were adolescent readers involved in this small but mighty study. They were 12 years old. And it really does reveal that students who lack background knowledge on a topic are at a disadvantage when it comes to comprehension, even if they have strong foundational reading skills. If we don't know much about a topic, it makes it very difficult to predict, to make inferences, to visualize while we're reading. That mental model becomes more complex because we don't really know what the words attach themselves to. What does that object look like? What is that movement being described? So again, background knowledge can help level the playing field. Any questions or thoughts about the good old baseball study or experiment before we move on? Oh, Nancy has a good question. So, since the study is small, has it ever been replicated? And Nancy, this probably won't surprise you, but it kind of depends on who you talk to. If you talk to Natalie Wexler, who is a very strong proponent of knowledge building, she will tell you probably around, I think, 19 times this has been replicated. If you look at someone like Tim Shanahan, he's going to tell you not enough times. So it depends on who your reference is that you're looking at. It is a small study. Yes, and also the interest and motivation piece. I agree with you, Carol. That is important. These students were interested. They read closely. It wasn't, some stupid passage about a whale. It had something to do with something they loved. So again, this is the baseball study. It's something kind of fun to look at and consider. And the baseball study moves our attention, and it moves our attention from word recognition to language comprehension, right? Background knowledge is part of this, and it helps our students understand what they're reading. If they're already locked into that world, if they know the language of that world, they're able to move through it more easily. It only makes sense, right? When we read something new and dense for the first time, we were talking in my group about how we often have to read it multiple times. We have to slow down. We have to hear ourselves reading it. So again, this is where our attention is now. And this is fed and changed and set up by many elements outside of our classroom. Those kids were experiencing baseball, my guess is, outside of the classroom, and we can help expand their language comprehension inside the classroom as well. So let's look at those components of language comprehension the same way we looked at those relating to word recognition, background knowledge, vocabulary, language structure, verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge. Goodness, it's getting later, you can tell. Okay. If we think about vocabulary, we know that some kids are coming in with a thinner vocabulary than we would like, and maybe not a vocabulary that is going to set them up to understand academic language very well. So we kind of key on those kids, and we know we've got some work to do there to help them enter the world of the language of learning, academic language. But there are also kids who show up and they're kind of rocking it vocab-wise. They sound like their parents. They sound like college professors. They sound like doctors. But over time, that vocabulary starts to slide because they are not able to continue to improve their vocabulary through text. So what do we do? How do we help both sets of these kids? The good news is it's kind of one thing. So sometimes we separate background knowledge and vocabulary instruction. But really, if you look at the quote on this slide from Dr. Jack Fletcher, he's from the Texas Center for Learning Disabilities. He's telling us that if we're teaching one well, we're teaching the other one, right? I love the idea that assessments of background knowledge and vocabulary are almost indistinguishable because of the high correlation. So we know from Elizabeth's lovely vocab presentation that she gave last month that vocab instruction is not grabbing words out of air or using a book that says 6th grade vocabulary. It is pulling vocabulary, meaningful vocabulary from meaningful text. Words are part of the world of that text, of that book. So doing one, again, background knowledge, is doing the other, vocabulary, and vice versa. So how do we do this well? First, we measure. I think it's really important to remind ourselves that we should never assume. We should never assume that a certain student doesn't know a certain word or that a certain student hasn't had a certain experience. The kids are with us for really a very short time. It could be that that kid that you think has only been camping, is always camping and talking about that, spends his summers in Atlanta and does city stuff all summer. We could also have a city kid who goes to the country all summer. We could have a kid who goes to France with his grandparents in the summer. They don't tell us everything. So it's really important that we assess their knowledge rather than assuming their knowledge. So there are good tools for this. Anticipation guides are really nice. We can use those to measure students' knowledge before, during, and after reading. These are typically paper, but you can also do an oral version. You can do a true false. Hey, before we read this, who thinks this statement is true? Who thinks it's false? Thumbs up or thumbs down. So we can do this orally, and then we check in through the reading. Hey, I know we're halfway through. We're going to check in on those statements again. Who still thinks this is true? Who still thinks this is false? And if you've changed your answer, why have you changed your answer? Rating scales, these can be paper or oral again. Fist to 5, right? Fist meaning I don't know anything about this. 5 meaning I'm an expert. Paper rating scales, circle the number that best describes your knowledge of this word or this idea or this topic. Oral discussions. I put this in here to remind us how important oral language is, even in middle school and high school. Talk to your students, talk with your students, let them talk to each other. The more that you know about them, the better able you might be able to predict what they know, how they've lived, and you might find experts among you, right? And we're going to talk about experts next. Finally, vocab previews. These are really, again, rating scales. They're just vocab specific. And you can find resources for this on the Google Classroom. Tools for building background knowledge. Once we know what we have to build, how do we build it? Multimedia text sets are a favorite. These can include everything from music to recipes, to podcasts, to books, to articles, to movies. As long as each item is carefully curated, there can be a door in for every student. Hands-on experiences. Field trips were amazing when we had them. If we can't, we can bring in camping implements. If we're about to read something like Hatchet and the kids have never spent much time outside or in the woods, whatever we have that relates to that period, that topic, we can let them hold and really get a sense of, again, so that they might be able to build a better mental model while they're reading. Classroom visits by experts, and experts, again, might be a kid in your class. Hey, this guy actually goes to Atlanta every summer, so he's willing to tell us about that experience. This person that you know has actually been to France. That can be a student, that can be a teacher, a grandparent, a service person, a fireman, a doctor, whoever is relevant and willing when it comes to the topic at hand. Finally, explicit vocabulary instruction. Again, you'll find really good resources for this on our Google Drive, and we are choosing words that feed background knowledge. So not words that are floating around, but words that are embedded in something that student is going to be reading, and we are teaching those words explicitly. I'm going to send you now to look at some resources on your own. And I would like you to just try to watch, if you can, 2 of the videos that are linked here for the teachers. They are very short. They are under 2 minutes each. So try to get as much in as you can in about 5 minutes, and then I will call you back. There are directions on the document that Lee is about to share. We have about a minute if you want to finish up what you're watching. For those of you already rejoining us, if you want to share one of the videos, just like the name or a description of it in the chat, that would be amazing. Just to let me know what you saw and what you're thinking about. The idea here is to give you something to try in your classroom. And if you're an admin, what to look for in your classroom. A lot of our older students are sitting quietly too much. They're not actively engaged in their education. Then we wonder why they check out. So I like to have moments, these opportunities for students to respond, physical moments, verbal moments. They can create something, but opportunities to respond are very evidence-based, and they do reduce some of those behaviors that we often see in our classrooms that are a little more undesirable. Very nice Vista 5 response card, anticipation guides. Yes, very nice response cards. Yep, again, something to make their learning visible so we know whether or not they're with us, so we know whether or not they're understanding and engaged in our instruction. And it also can stop us in our tracks if we see their responses aren't what we had hoped. So we are going to keep moving because we are nearing the end. And we are just going to spend a couple minutes looking at the long-term impacts of adolescent reading struggles. These are consequences for individuals, families, and communities. So I think sometimes it's intuitive to know it's not great to be the person who can't read at an adult level as an adult. And maybe we can even extend that out to the family, and we realize that maybe that's not bringing the most positive things into the room, right? Maybe incomes are dampened. It certainly impacts self-esteem, but we don't always see what happens to our community. So we're going to spend just a couple slides looking at that before we really close up for today. So when these students go out into the community, they graduate, they're still years behind third grade readers, second grade readers. Over time, these students are less likely to graduate, less likely to vote, more likely to interact with the juvenile justice system and the justice system, more likely to be unemployed, more likely to live in poverty, more likely to report being in ill health, and finally, they are less likely to be involved in their children's education. So these are things that happen when we don't address these needs. Unfortunately, you can peek at the bottom there. These are social and economic costs of illiteracy. They're also very personal. Imagine, again, being unemployed, not feeling confident enough in your reading to go and vote and have your voice heard that way, not wanting to go back into a school to talk about your children's education because you just don't feel confident in that venue. We also need to look at what happens to communities. And so I'm not always happy to find the things that I find when I'm thinking about adolescent literacy and adult literacy, but I want you to read what is on this slide to understand a little better how this impacts communities as well as families and individuals. We don't always see a connection to reading struggles, but that really doesn't mean it's not there. This is costing a community safety. This is costing a community willing police officers that are unable to do the work, to pass the tests, to do the reading. This is in Detroit. You can peek at that title there. A fifth of American adults struggle to read. Why are we failing to teach them? My bigger question is, why is it a fifth of American adults who are struggling to read? So there is a tide I would very much like to see stemmed. All right, to prevent these poor outcomes, all adolescent readers deserve administrators who build structures to accommodate and support evidence-based instruction, evidence-based instruction that supports them in reaching advanced stages of literacy. Remember CAT to catastrophe. Content area teachers who provide instruction in the multiple literacy strategies needed to meet the demands of the specific discipline, whether or not you consider yourself a reading teacher. If kids read in your classroom, you are responsible for helping them read in your classroom. Access to appropriate, intensive, and individualized interventions that are provided by a trained specialist. Again, hours, not minutes. Dedicated space, not a hallway or a corner. If we want kids to take the work seriously and to feel respected as learners, then we need to make it respectable. Let's revisit our objectives quickly. We said we would get a clear picture of the present. I think we did that. We looked at research on teacher readiness to address the needs of adolescent readers. We said we would explore some causes of adolescent reading struggles. We did that. We looked at word reading struggles and background knowledge differences. And we talked about some things that we can do to address these challenges. And finally, we said we would consider the long-term impacts of adolescent reading struggles. And we just did that by looking at research and reporting on the struggles faced by adults with poor reading skills. The last thing I'm going to ask of you, before you have a few things to do for the team, is to take a moment to jot down one thing you plan to do with something that you learned today. That can be going back to an article, that can be trying something in your classroom, that can be looking at scheduling or support for your teachers. It's really powerful when we write something down, we take it more seriously, we hold ourselves more accountable. If you would like to share what that something is, you are welcome to share it in the chat. If it is personal and you want to keep it to yourself, that is fine as well. Otherwise, I am going to ask you for just one more. Oh, very nice. Thank you for adding that, Cindy. Jennifer, thank you for adding that. Julie, thank you. Nancy, very nice. And thank you for sharing these thoughts. It's really nice when your voice is just about to die and you're parched to know that folks are thinking of doing something with what we just learned and talked about. And thanks to all of you. I always learn something when I have these breakout rooms and these workshops because y'all bring it. I'm in Oklahoma, so you're going to get a lot of y'alls starting to creep in. All right. Next thing we need, we just keep asking. We need your input. You can see on the slide here, communities of practice. So what is this? Read Vermont is seeking input from our partners in the field to establish communities of practice where you can apply learning with peers to sustain the momentum for literacy improvement. So again, what are we going to do with all these things we're talking about? Is there a topic area you most want to discuss with colleagues statewide? Please add it to the chat if something springs to mind. What would you most like to discuss with your colleagues across Vermont?